You provision a virtual machine in AWS. You choose the operating system, the instance type, the storage, the region. You install your applications, configure your software, manage your data. You're in complete control, right? Wrong. You control the guest OS and everything above it. But the hypervisor, Amazon controls that. The physical server your VM runs on, Amazon controls that. When maintenance happens on the underlying hardware, Amazon decides that. The network routing between availability zones, Amazon controls that. The data center security, Amazon's domain entirely. You have control, sure, but it's partial control. And the sooner you understand exactly what partial means, where your control ends and dependencies begin, the better decisions you'll make about when to use cloud and how to use it safely. Today, we're confronting the reality of partial control in cloud computing, what you actually control versus what you think you control. Partial control means you have authority and capability to manage some aspects of a system, but not all aspects. Other entities, primarily your cloud provider, but also other dependencies, control the rest. This isn't a cloud-specific problem. When you drive a car, you have partial control. You control the steering, acceleration, and braking. But you don't control the roads, the traffic lights, other drivers, the weather, or the laws of physics. Your control is real, but limited by external factors you can't change. In cloud computing, the same principle applies at every layer. You control what's above your responsibility boundary in the shared responsibility model, but everything below that boundary, the provider controls it, and you're dependent on their decisions, their reliability, their security, and their operational practices. Here's what makes partial control tricky. It often feels like full control. You have a powerful dashboard. You can provision resources instantly. You can configure things in detailed ways. The interface makes you feel in charge, but that feeling masks the dependencies beneath the surface. When those dependencies break, change, or behave unexpectedly, the illusion shatters. Suddenly, you realize, I don't actually control this. I'm renting capability, not owning infrastructure. And there's a massive difference. Let's get specific about where control boundaries sit, because this varies dramatically by service model, and most people don't think about it carefully enough. In infrastructure as a service, EC2, Azure VMs, Compute Engine, you control the guest operating system upward, but you don't control the hypervisor, the physical server hardware, when the provider performs maintenance that might reboot your instance, the physical network infrastructure, or the data center environment. When AWS says we're migrating your instance to new hardware, you can't say no. That's their control, not yours. In platform as a service, Elastic Beanstalk, App Service, Cloud Run, your control ends at the application layer. You control your code and configuration. You don't control the runtime version rollouts when the platform gets patched, how the underlying scaling works, or what operating system it runs on. The provider can change the platform, and you adapt, or your application breaks. In Managed Database Services, RDS, Azure SQL Database, Cloud SQL, you control the schema, queries, and data. You don't control the database engine version management beyond choosing major versions, the replication topology in detail, how backups are physically stored, or how the provider ensures durability. They handle it, which is convenient, but it's their control, not yours. In software as a service, Salesforce, Microsoft 365, Workday, your control is limited to configuration and usage. You don't control when updates roll out, what features get deprecated, how the application's architecture works, or where your data is physically stored beyond broad regional choices. The provider controls the application, and you use it on their terms. And here's the kicker. In every model, you don't control provider-level failures. If an entire AWS region goes down, your redundancy strategy better span regions because you can't fix the provider's infrastructure. If Azure has a global authentication outage, you're waiting. You're dependent on provider reliability, regardless of your own technical sophistication. Let's contrast what partial control feels like versus what it actually is, because this gap causes many cloud failures. The illusion: I can provision 100 servers with a single API call. I'm in complete control. The reality: You control the request. The provider controls whether they have capacity, how they schedule the provisioning, which physical hardware gets used, and whether the request succeeds. The illusion: I've configured high availability across availability zones. My application is bulletproof. The reality: you've configured for redundancy within the provider's infrastructure. If the provider has a control plane failure affecting all zones, your configuration doesn't help. Your high availability depends on their high availability. The illusion: I've encrypted all my data. It's completely secure. The reality: you control enabling encryption and managing keys. The provider controls the encryption implementation, the key management service infrastructure, and ultimately has the ability to access encrypted data if legally compelled, or if you lose your keys and need recovery. The illusion: I can migrate to another provider anytime. I'm not locked in. The reality: you're dependent on provider-specific APIs, services, and operational characteristics. Migration is possible but not trivial. Your partial control includes choosing providers, but switching costs are real. The illusion: the provider guarantees 99.99% uptime, so I don't need to worry about availability. The reality: the provider guarantees their infrastructure uptime. Your application's availability depends on how you use that infrastructure. If you built a single point of failure into your architecture, the provider's SLA doesn't save you. Here's the fundamental reality: partial control means partial capability. You can do powerful things, but you can't do everything, and what you can't do might be exactly what you need during a crisis. So how do you operate effectively when you only have partial control? First, know your boundaries. Explicitly understand where your control ends for each service you use. What can you control? What can't you? What do you depend on the provider for? This isn't philosophical, it's operational planning. Second, design for dependencies. Since you're dependent on provider infrastructure, design with that dependency in mind. Multi-region architectures, cross-provider backup strategies, degraded mode operations, all of these acknowledge partial control and plan around it. Third, accept trade-offs consciously. Partial control is the price you pay for not managing infrastructure yourself. That trade-off makes sense when the provider handles things better than you could. It doesn't make sense when you need capabilities the provider can't offer. Choose deliberately. Fourth, monitor what you can control and watch what you can't. You can't fix provider issues, but you can detect them quickly and respond. Visibility into dependencies, even ones you don't control, enables better incident response. And finally, don't fight partial control. Leverage it. The provider's control over infrastructure means they're handling operational burden you don't have to. The parts you don't control are often the parts you shouldn't want to control anyway. The art is knowing the difference. Partial control is the fundamental reality of cloud computing. You're not renting full control. You're renting capabilities with dependencies baked in. Understanding what you actually control versus what you think you control changes how you architect, how you plan for failures, and how you evaluate whether cloud services meet your needs. And remember, the illusion of control is more dangerous than the reality of dependency. See you in the next one.